At 89 years old, Woody Allen broke his silence. He didn't use a press release or a statement. Instead, he had private conversations that are now becoming public. People close to the famous director say he was very upset and shocked by her death. But here's what's strange. Why was he shocked? They had known each other for 56 years. They made 9 movies together. She was his biggest inspiration, his most loyal supporter, and the woman who never really left his life. What Allen is saying now after she died changes everything we thought we knew about their relationship. This isn't just about a director and his actress. This is about a love so messy, so confusing, so real that it couldn't work as a romance, but it also couldn't completely end. For many years, we saw their relationship through movies like Annie Hall and romantic comedies. We saw the public version. The truth is much more complicated, much more sad, and much more human than anything Allen ever showed in his movies. She stood by him when everyone else in the world turned their backs. She defended him when it cost her everything. And now at 89, knowing he won't live forever, Allen is finally telling the real story. The story of the woman who saved him, the love he couldn't keep, and the regrets that still bother him today. It was 1969, and Woody Allen was choosing actresses for his Broadway play called Play It Again, Sam. He had seen many actresses, all talented, all pretty, all forgettable. Then Diane Keaton walked in. She was 23 years old, fresh from California, wearing clothes that didn't match and talking in a way that didn't make sense, but somehow felt totally honest. Allen later described that first meeting with words that turned out to be really important. He called her adorable, funny, completely original in style, real and fresh. But what he didn't say publicly, what friends are revealing now, is that he was scared. Scared because she was everything he wasn't. She was light and he was dark. She was happy and he was negative. She was free, and he was trapped by his own worried thoughts. He gave her the part right away, not just because she was perfect for the role, but because he couldn't imagine not seeing her again. Within weeks, they were dating. Within months, she had moved into his apartment. Their friends thought the relationship would last 6 months, maybe less. How could it possibly work? He was the worried Jewish intellectual from Brooklyn who thought too much about everything. She was the California girl who said la-di-da and really meant it. He lived in his head. She lived in the moment. He collected worries. She collected happiness, but somehow, impossibly, it worked. At least for a little while. Those early years, 1969 to 1971, were the happiest years of Allen's life. He admitted this many years later to close friends. With Diane, he felt seen. Not as Woody Allen, the comedian. Not as the director. Not as the famous person. Just as Alan Konigsberg, the scared kid from Brooklyn who never felt good enough. She had this way of looking at him, really looking at him, and making him feel like maybe he was okay after all. They would walk through Central Park for hours. She would point at things, clouds, dogs, children playing, and find wonder in everyday stuff. He had never understood that before. How someone could just be happy without a reason, without thinking too much, without needing to understand why. She tried to teach him that, but the truth is he couldn't learn it. His personality wouldn't let him. Living together showed the problems. Allen was controlling in ways that seemed loving but weren't. He wanted to know where she was, who she talked to, what she was thinking every moment. He would try to change her, try to make her more sophisticated, more intellectual, more like the women in his movies. But Diane pushed back, not in a mean way. That wasn't her style. She pushed back by simply staying herself. When he would correct her grammar, she would smile and say the wrong thing again. When he would suggest better books to read, she would stick with her photography magazines. When he would criticize her clothes, she would wear even crazier combinations the next day. It drove him crazy. It also made him love her more. She was the one thing in his life he couldn't control, couldn't direct, couldn't reshape into his vision. And that's what made her dangerous. Friends from that time remember the arguments. Not screaming fights. Allen didn't do those. But cold intellectual put-downs where he would pick apart her thoughts, her choices, her very way of being. And she would just look at him with those eyes and say something like, "You think too much," which would make him even angrier because she was right. The breaking point came in 1971. Francis Ford Coppola was choosing actors for The Godfather. Through connections, Diane got an audition for Kay Corleone. She almost didn't go. Alan was dismissive. "It's a gangster movie, not your style. You're doing Play It Again, Sam with me." But something made her go anyway. Maybe curiosity, maybe instinct, maybe the first whisper of rebellion. She got the part. She hadn't even read the script when she accepted. Years later, she admitted this publicly. "How bad is that? I didn't even really read it. But I needed a job." That's what she said. But people close to them knew the truth. She needed more than a job. She needed to escape. When she told Alan she was taking the role, that she would be in California for months, that she would miss his film, he didn't yell. He went silent. The cold, hurt silence that was worse than any argument. "You're choosing Coppola over me," he said finally. "You're choosing them over us." She tried to explain. "It's not about choosing. It's about my career, my life." But he couldn't hear it. To Alan, it was betrayal. Plain, simple, unforgivable. She left anyway, and something between them broke that never fully healed. While Diane was filming The Godfather, something else happened that Alan would obsess over for years. She fell for Al Pacino. Not right away, not obviously, but it was there. The chemistry on screen was real because the attraction off screen was real. Pacino was everything Alan wasn't. Physically present, emotionally intense, dangerously charming. Where Alan overthought things, Pacino felt. Where Alan analyzed, Pacino acted. And Diane, who had spent 2 years being subtly controlled by Alan, found in Pacino a completely different kind of energy. They didn't start dating then, not officially. But the seed was planted and Alan knew it. He could see it in the film footage, in the way she looked at Pacino on screen. Friends say Alan became obsessed with The Godfather during its production. He would ask mutual friends about the filming, about Diane, about her co-stars. He would ask carefully, trying to understand what was happening 3,000 miles away. When she returned to New York, things were different. She was more confident, more sure of herself, less willing to go along with his judgment. She had been directed by Coppola, acted opposite Pacino and Brando, been part of something huge and important. Alan's intellectual comedy suddenly felt small by comparison. They tried to make it work. She starred in his next film, then the next. But things had shifted. She wasn't his discovery anymore, his creation, his student. She was a movie star in her own right, and Alan couldn't handle it. The relationship officially ended in 1972, though people disagree on who ended it. Alan claimed it was mutual. Friends say Diane left. What's certain is this: she was tired. Tired of being analyzed. Tired of being improved. Tired of feeling like a project instead of a partner. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not who she could become. And Alan couldn't give her that. He loved the idea of her, the character of her, the role of her in his life. But the real Diane, messy and illogical and beautifully chaotic, that scared him too much. You would think that would be the end. A relationship ends. People move on. Time passes. But Woody Allen doesn't work that way. In 1977, 5 years after their breakup, he made Annie Hall. And he made sure Diane Keaton starred in it. The film was about their relationship, not loosely based on it, not inspired by it, but actually about them. Scene after scene pulled from real life. The arguments were real arguments. The awkward moments were their awkward moments. Even the name Annie Hall came from her. Annie was her real nickname. Hall was her birth last name before she changed it to Keaton. Alan wrote the part so specifically for her that no other actress could have played it. He even had her wear her own clothes from when they had dated. Those famous outfits, the ties and vests and oversized men's clothes, that was actually how she dressed. He was putting their relationship on screen, every intimate detail, every private moment, every flaw, and making her perform it for the world. Some called it genius. Others called it exploitation. Diane called it weird and painful, but she did it anyway, because despite everything, despite the controlling behavior and the emotional manipulation and the way he dissected their love, she still trusted him as a director. She still believed in his vision. and maybe some part of her wanted to preserve what they had had, even if it was through the distorted lens of his art. The film became huge. It won Best Picture. She won Best Actress. And suddenly the whole world knew their story. Or thought they did. Because the film wasn't really true. Alan had rewritten the ending. In real life, their breakup had been messy and painful and unresolved. In Annie Hall, it was bittersweet and philosophical and somehow romantic. He had taken their failure and made it beautiful. He had taken her rejection and made it mutual. He had rewritten history to be more pleasant, more poetic, more worthy of his artistic vision. And she let him. Years later, Alan would admit to friends what the film really was. It wasn't a love letter. It was an exorcism. He was trying to get her out of his system, to understand why it didn't work, to somehow make peace with losing her. But here's the thing about exorcisms. Sometimes they don't work. Sometimes the ghost stays. Sometimes you're haunted forever. After Annie Hall, a strange thing happened. Their romantic relationship was over. Definitely, permanently, completely. But their professional relationship? That was just beginning. Between 1978 and 2020, Diane Keaton appeared in 8 more Woody Allen films. Manhattan in 1979, just 2 years after Annie Hall. Manhattan Murder Mystery in 1993, over 2 decades later. And several others spanning 42 years. Think about that for a moment. 42 years of working together after the romance ended. 42 years of seeing each other on set. Of him directing her. Of them creating art together while keeping careful emotional distance. It was an arrangement that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. Friends say there was an unspoken understanding between them. She could have other relationships, other loves, other lives. But on film, she was his. And he needed that. He needed her in his work even if he couldn't have her in his life. That's what he told a close friend once. Every other actress was compared to her. Every other performance measured against the standard she set. He would work with brilliant women. Mia Farrow, Diane Wiest, Scarlett Johansson, Kate Blanchett. But none of them were Diane. None of them had that particular magic. That specific quality that made his words come alive in ways even he hadn't imagined. This arrangement took its toll on her other relationships, especially with Al Pacino. Their on-again, off-again romance lasted 15 years, from 1974 to 1990. And throughout it all, Alan was there. Not physically, but as a presence, a ghost, a comparison Pacino couldn't escape. She would leave to do a Woody Allen film. She would talk about Woody's genius, Woody's vision, Woody's brilliance. And Pacino, confident as he was, felt himself competing with something he couldn't fight. How do you compete with someone who has already lost? That's what Alan was. He had already lost her romantically, so there was no threat, no danger, no competition. But emotionally, creatively, that connection remained unbreakable. Pacino wanted marriage, wanted commitment, wanted her full attention. She couldn't give it. Not because she didn't love him. She was crazy about him, she would say later. But because some part of her was still tied to Alan in ways she couldn't explain or escape. Then came 2014 and everything changed. Dylan Farrow's accusations against Woody Allen came back into the news. The details were devastating. The allegations were horrible. Hollywood began distancing itself from Allen immediately. Actors who had worked with him issued statements. Directors who had admired him went silent. Award ceremonies stopped honoring him. By 2018, with the Me Too movement in full force, Allen had become Hollywood's outcast. Everyone abandoned him. Everyone except Diane Keaton. In January 2018, she tweeted something that would define the rest of her public life. "Woody Allen is my friend, and I continue to believe him." Just 13 words that destroyed relationships, cost her roles, and made her a target of public anger. Judd Apatow attacked her publicly. Dylan Farrow's supporters called her an enabler. Articles were written about how disappointing she was, how her loyalty was misplaced, how she was on the wrong side of history. She lost work. Films that would have cast her went to other actresses. Directors who had wanted to work with her suddenly couldn't make it happen. Friends in the industry stopped calling. She became, in many ways, as controversial as Allen himself. But she wouldn't back down. In 2023, 5 years into the controversy, she gave an interview that made things worse. When asked if working with Allen overshadowed her career, she said, "No, not at all. I'm proud. I'm proud beyond measure." Then she said something that sparked immediate outrage. She dismissed survivor culture as a horrible shame, then added, "You got to get over it." The backlash was swift and brutal. But she didn't apologize, didn't clarify, didn't take it back. What made her so fiercely, stubbornly, destructively loyal to a man she hadn't even dated in over 50 years? Allen never asked her to defend him, never requested her support, never demanded her loyalty. She gave it freely at great personal cost, because of something most people couldn't understand. She believed him, not blindly, not naively, but after knowing him for 5 decades, after seeing him at his worst and his best, after being in his life more consistently than almost anyone, she looked at the accusations and didn't believe them. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe her loyalty was misplaced. But it was real and it was chosen. She knew what it would cost her, and she paid that price willingly. Throughout 2024, Diane Keaton's health was declining rapidly. She kept it private, almost completely hidden, even from close friends. There were signs for those who looked closely. She had lost weight, appeared weak in her few public outings, had canceled several projects without explanation. But she never made a public announcement, never prepared anyone for what was coming. On October 11, 2025, emergency services were called to her Brentwood home at 8:08 in the morning. She was transported to a local hospital where she was pronounced dead. The official announcement came hours later. Diane Keaton, aged 79, had passed away. No cause of death was given, just that it had been sudden. When Woody Allen got the call, sources say he was stunned into silence. "I didn't even know she was sick," he reportedly said. "How is that possible?" For someone he had known for 56 years, someone he had worked with 9 times, someone who had defended him when the world turned away, he hadn't known she was dying. That absence of knowledge, that gap in awareness, hit him hard. He had been so focused on his own isolation, his own outcast status, his own battles, that he had failed to see she was fighting something far worse. The funeral was small, private, just family and a handful of close friends. Allen attended, masked, hunched over, looking every bit of his 89 years. He brought something that made several attendees cry. It was a photograph from 1970, one of the 2 of them on the set of Play It Again, Sam. They're both laughing in it, genuinely laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from pure joy rather than performing. He had had it framed. Meryl Streep, who attended the service, later told a friend that Allen couldn't stop crying. Not quiet, dignified tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs. She had never seen him like that. Nobody had. Woody Allen was famous for his emotional control, his intellectualizing of feelings, his distance from raw emotion. But confronted with Diane's death, all of that collapsed. Later, people discovered he had written her a letter, a long, detailed letter explaining things he had never said out loud. But he had written it too late. She died before he could send it, before she could read his words, his confessions, his truth. A few days after Diane's death, Woody Allen started talking. Not publicly. He would never do that. But in private conversations with old friends, with colleagues, with the few people still in his circle, he began revealing things. Things he had kept locked away for decades. Things he had never admitted even to himself about why their relationship couldn't work. He was brutally honest. "I was too controlling and she was too free," he said. "I tried to remake her into something more manageable, and she resisted by being more herself. I loved her, but I loved the idea of controlling her more. That's not love. That's ownership. And she was right to leave." About Annie Hall, he confessed something that changes how we see the entire film. "I gave her the Oscar, but she gave me everything else. The film, the career, the credibility, the soul of my work. Without her, I'm just another neurotic making comedies about neurotic people. With her, I was creating something real." About the other women in his life, he was equally blunt. "I loved Mia differently. Soon Yi differently, all of them differently. But Diane, I loved her the most, honestly. She saw the real me, the pathetic, insecure, damaged me. And she stayed anyway, until she couldn't anymore. Because I made it impossible. His biggest regret? The thing that haunts him at 89 years old, facing his own mortality? I should have just let her be. That's what he keeps saying to friends. I should have just loved her the way she was instead of trying to make her into what I thought she should be. I should have been grateful for the miracle of her instead of trying to improve it. About her defense of him during the accusations, his response reveals everything. She believed me when nobody else would. She stood by me when it cost her career, her reputation, her relationships. She didn't have to do that. I never asked her to. But she did it anyway because that's who she was. Loyal, stubborn, convinced of what she believed. Just like I tried to change her for years. The world tried to change her in those last years. Make her denounce me. Make her apologize. Make her fall in line. And she said no. Same as she always said no to me when I pushed too hard. There's also the revelation about their last conversation, which happened months before her death. They had talked on the phone, something they did occasionally over the years. Just checking in, brief and surface level usually. But this time was different. She had called him, which was rare, and she had said something that stuck with him. She said, "I don't regret any of it. The relationship, the films, defending you, none of it. I was who I was, and you were who you were, and it was what it was." That's very her, you know, he told a friend. Not analyzing it to death, just accepting it. At 89, what does Woody Allen want people to know about Diane Keaton? That she was right about everything, about him, about life, about not overthinking. That Annie Hall wasn't the truth about their relationship. It was his fantasy version of it. That she was a better person than any character he ever wrote. That she saved him far more than he ever saved her, despite what their films might suggest. Years, 9 films, one enduring, complicated, impossible love. That's the story of Woody Allen and Diane Keaton. Not a romance in the traditional sense, not a friendship exactly, but something more complicated and more real than either. She was his muse, his conscience, his defender, and the one who got away. He was her mentor, her tormentor, the man she never fully left even after she left him. The irony isn't lost on anyone. She never married, dated some of Hollywood's most eligible men, but stayed loyal longest to the one who couldn't hold on to her. And he, famous for his relationships with younger women, for moving on quickly and completely, never quite got over the California girl. Their relationship really defies easy categorization. It was too messy to be romance, too intimate to be friendship, too unresolved to be past, too painful to be present. It was something that exists outside normal definitions, something that only they fully understood. Now Allen is 89, alone with his memories and his regrets, and the knowledge that he can never tell her the things he finally understands. She's gone, and with her goes the last connection to a version of himself he barely recognizes now. The young ambitious director who thought he could shape the world to his vision. Who thought love was about molding someone into your ideal? Who thought control and care were the same thing? Diane Keaton's legacy extends far beyond the films and the Oscar, and the iconic style. She was the woman who defined Woody Allen on screen and off, who gave his work its heart, who stood by him when standing by him meant standing alone. And maybe that's the truest thing about their relationship. She saw him clearly, every flaw and failure and weakness, and she didn't turn away. Not when they dated, not when they broke up, not when the world demanded it. She stayed herself stubbornly and completely, and in doing so gave him something he spent his whole life trying to capture on film. The miracle of being loved exactly as you are. In Hollywood's long and storied history, there's never been anything quite like Woody and Diane. Before we go, if you found this story as fascinating as we did putting it together, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are more untold stories from Hollywood's golden age, and beyond that we're bringing to light. What do you think about their relationship? Was her loyalty admirable or misguided? Let us know in the comments below. Some loves are too complicated to work, but too powerful to end. And sometimes the most important relationships in our lives are the ones that refuse to fit into any category we understand. Woody and Diane proved that, lived it, and left us with art and questions that will outlast them both.